Winter dawn crawled over the Wyoming plains like a wounded animal, dragging its pale light across a world muted by snow. Elias Crowder rode through it with the stubborn patience of a man who had stopped expecting surprises from life. Frost clung to the ends of his beard, turning him into a figure carved from winter itself, silent and stripped of softness. His horse exhaled small ghosts into the brittle air, each breath echoing the quiet ache Elias had carried for years. He had risen before daylight out of habit, though habits were the only things that still nudged him forward. The cattle needed checking. The fences needed tending. Loneliness, however, tended no man. Elias had learned that the hard way. Ever since the accident in the mines that took his younger brother Thomas, Elias had lived as though the world had marked him with some invisible warning. Don't get too close. People in town obeyed it without him asking. He turned toward his barn, readying himself for the morning's chores, when a thin, tremulous sound met his ears. It was small, so small he thought it might be the whine of timber settling under frost. But then it came again, fragile as a dying ember, a muffled sob. Elias stiffened. His instincts sharpened. Trouble in the winter was like fire in a dry field, one spark, and everything could be lost. He approached the barn doors, pushing them open slowly so the hinges wouldn't scream through the cold. Light seeped inside in a soft gold ribbon, revealing hay bales stacked like weary giants and tools hanging in neat, disciplined rows. He took one step, then another, and the whimper came again, this time clearer. Behind the barrels, Elias's hand hovered near the handle of the knife sheathed at his belt knot, out of fear. Caution! He edged around the barrels and froze in place. A little girl sat curled in a nest of hay, wrapped in a too large winter coat that swallowed her frail frame. Her hair dark and tangled, dusted with snow fell, across cheeks stained with dried tears. She looked up at him with eyes that shouldn't have held so much fear or so much hope at once. For one silent, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then the girl whispered, "Mama's waiting outside."
Yes.
The words hit Elias harder than the cold. He looked toward the open door, the endless stretch of untouched snow, the line of pine shadows, the faint footprints leading from the woods. No woman stood there. No shape moved. Only the wind answered. Elias lowered himself to one knee. He made no sudden gestures. "You're safe," he said quietly. His voice came out rough, more like gravel than comfort. "What's your name?" She hesitated, her small fingers clutching the coat tighter around her. "June. Mama calls me June." "Well, June," he murmured, "why don't you come away from the cold? Let's get you warm first." He extended a hand, palm open, showing her she had a choice. For a long heartbeat, she simply watched him as if weighing the worth of his soul in that single moment. Then she slid her tiny hand into his. Her skin felt like ice. Elias wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her inside the ranch house. She moved quietly, distrustful of her own footsteps, like she'd learned to make herself small for reasons she wouldn't say. He heated water on the stove, keeping his movements steady, careful, letting the warmth fill the space between them before the questions did. June sat at the edge of the chair, legs dangling, eyes darting around the room as if memorizing escape routes. She kept glancing toward the window, toward the barn, toward the emptiness beyond it. Elias filled a tin cup with warm broth and placed it in her trembling hands. She took a tiny sip, the steam fogging her lashes. "You said your mama was waiting," Elias said gently. "Where is she?" June swallowed, her throat working visibly. "She told me to hide, because bad men were coming. She said she'd come back. She always comes back." But her voice was threaded with doubt, too old for a child her size. Elias's stomach tightened. He wasn't one for getting tangled in other folks' trouble, but leaving a child alone was not in him either. Not anymore. He'd failed his brother once. He would not fail this child. "Not this winter. Not ever again? Did you two travel far?" he asked. June nodded. "Mama said we had to keep walking. Even when my feet hurt. Even when it got too cold." He noticed then the raw, cracked skin around her knuckles, the worn soles of her shoes. She had walked far more miles than any child should. He turned back to the stove. letting the soft crackle of heat fill the silence. June watched him as though he were some peculiar, unpredictable creature, yet she didn't seem afraid of him, not truly. More like she was afraid of disappearing, of being forgotten, lost, left behind in a world too big for someone so small. When she finished her broth, Elias knelt again, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "You can rest," he said softly. "You're safe here." But June shook her head, gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. "I can't sleep. Mama might come back. I have to see her." Her panic was sharp and trembling, like a bird beating its wings against a cage. Elias gently pried her fingers free, then placed her small hand over his own heart, so she could feel its steady rhythm. "I'll look for her," he promised. "And if she's near, I'll bring her back. I give you my word." June's hand stilled. Her breathing eased, little by little. She nodded, though her eyes shone with the exhaustion of someone who had carried fear too far, too long. Elias tucked her into the small guest bed, the blanket rising to her chin. Her eyelids fluttered, refusing to surrender fully. Only when Elias sat in the chair nearby, arms crossed, boots planted, guarding her with quiet certainty, did June finally drift into sleep. He stayed long after her breathing steadied. The house, usually hollow and echoing with the absence of family, felt different with her presence. Not louder, not warmer even, just less empty. When he was sure June wouldn't wake, he stepped out onto the porch. The wind cut across his face like a blade, but he welcomed it. It kept him thinking clearly. He studied the snow, tracing the faint footprints leading from the tree line. A woman and a child had trudged through the cold, desperate, hunted. June said bad men were coming. That meant they still could be. He scanned the trees, listening for anything the wind didn't carry. Nothing, only the hush of winter. Deep and vast, Elias felt an old ache, rising, the same ache that came the night Thomas died. When he had been too slow to reach him, too late to save him. That night had carved a permanent hollow in him, the kind no amount of winters could fill. But now there was June, and somewhere out there, a mother who had walked into the darkness alone. He returned inside, closing the door against the cold. June slept deeply now, curls spread on the pillow like a dark halo. Elias kept watch until the clock ticked past what little remained of dawn's early light. He knew what he had to do. He would search for Annie McCall. He would bring June's mother home alive, if the winter allowed it. And for reasons he didn't dare name, he felt the faint stir of warmth inside him, something hesitant yet insistent. Like the first ember of a fire, long since thought dead, before heading out. He lit a lantern and placed it on the windowsill. Its glow soft and steady, a signal for a woman who might be wandering in the dark. A promise kept burning, June murmured in her sleep. One small word floating through the room like a plea carried by the wind. Mama. Elias closed his eyes. "I'll find her," he whispered, not to June but to the winter itself, as though the land could hear him and hold him to his vow. When he opened his eyes again, the last of the night had surrendered to morning, and though section 1 ended in quiet, it carried a thread that pulled the story forward, a fragile, expectant thread leading straight into the cold wilderness where answers waited, and Elias Crowder stepped toward them, not knowing that this journey would change far more than the fate of one missing woman. It would thaw something buried deep in his soul, something he believed winter had claimed forever. Winter thickened as Elias followed the faint trail leading into the pines, the world narrowing into a corridor of white breath and dark trunks. Every step broke the silence in soft, deliberate crunches. He carried June's fear with him, like a fragile bundle tucked under his coat, reminder that somewhere beyond the frost-bitten air, a mother was fighting to return to her child. The tracks were shallow now, blurred by the night wind, but he kept chasing them with a determination born from old wounds he no longer wanted to obey. The woods grew denser, shadows deepening into blue-black pockets, where the cold felt alive, watchful. Elias paused often to listen. Not for wolves or drifting snow, but for the breath of danger the kind June had whispered about. He had known men who preyed on weakness, He had seen the greed in their eyes. If such men were trailing June and her mother, they wouldn't be far. A faint glimmer flickered between the trees. Not sunlight, too steady. Firelight. Elias crouched, every muscle tightening. The fire burned low in a small clearing. 2 men hunched near it, their voices drifting lazily in the frozen air. He recognized one from descriptions he'd overheard in Silverbrush. Malcolm Tate, a bounty hunter with cold ambition for eyes. The other, Royce Barlow, had the nervous look of someone who would follow a wolf just to avoid being alone. They spoke with quiet certainty, unaware of how their words slid into the ears of the man stalking them. "Woman can't have gone far," Malcolm muttered. "She was limping. Cold will finish her off if we don't." Royce poked the fire with a stick. "What about the kid?" Malcolm spat into the snow. "Worth more than the mother. Force'll pay good for a child whose daddy's got debts. And if the mother saw what she shouldn't be seen, well, ain't no witness if there ain't no witness left." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. June had been right. Her fear had been carved from truth, not imagination. And Annie. She was somewhere close, injured, hunted. He waited until the men's conversation dissolved into grumbles. Then he slipped silently around the clearing, every step measured. He knew where a terrified woman might go, away from the fire, deeper into cover, hoping to survive until dawn. He found churned snow leading toward a fallen pine, its trunk split by lightning. Kneeling, he pushed aside a tangle of branches. A pale face blinked up at him from beneath the sheltering limbs. Annie McCall lay on her side, her breath shallow and uneven, her fingers stiff with cold. Snow clung to her lashes like tiny crystalline tears. For a long moment she did not recognize him. Then she exhaled a ragged sigh. "You came," she whispered. Elias gathered her carefully, supporting her weight as she tried to sit up. "June's safe. She's warm. She's waiting for you." Those words sparked a faint trembling fire inside Annie's exhausted eyes. She tried to stand, but crumpled with a soft cry. Elias steadied her, pulling her close so her freezing body leaned against his warmth. "I'm taking you home," he said quietly. Annie shook her head, pain tightening her expression. "They'll follow. Malcolm won't stop. They'll have to pass through me," Elias answered. The statement wasn't bravado. It was simply the truth, as steady and immovable as the mountain ridge behind them. He guided Annie through the trees, keeping too thick brush where shadows protected them. Her breath hitched with each step, but she clung to his arm with stubborn resolve. She had walked through too much darkness to give up now. Elias admired that unspoken strength so different from the bluster of men who wielded guns but lacked courage. The ridge narrowed into an icy path overlooking a ravine. Elias paused, listening. A twig snapped in the distance. Voices. The hunters had found her trail. He helped Annie down a slope and into a sheltered rock hollow, urging her to crouch low. From this vantage, he watched Malcolm and Royce enter the clearing above them. Malcolm scanned the ground like a wolf scenting blood. "She's close," he growled. "Tracks are fresh." Royce shifted nervously. "Maybe the cold's got her already." "Oh," Malcolm spat. "She's got grit. And grit is a nuisance unless it's crushed." Elias felt Annie shudder beside him. Her cold fingers tightened around his coat sleeve. He placed his hand over hers, letting her feel the steady strength there. Fear needed something to hold on to. Malcolm's boots began crunching down the path toward them. Elias's mind raced. He didn't want gunfire. Not with Annie half frozen and unable to run. Fighting would only hurt her. He needed something quieter, smarter. As Malcolm descended, Elias stepped out from the hollow, placing himself directly in the path, shoulders squared. The wind lifted his coat slightly, making him appear larger, more certain than he felt. Malcolm stopped mid-step. Royce inhaled sharply. "Crowder?" Elias kept his voice calm. "Turn around. You've hunted far enough." Malcolm barked a laugh. "You think we're scared of you?" Royce, however, took a step back. He'd heard stories how Elias had once pulled 3 miners from a collapsed shaft. How he'd survived a frost storm that buried a dozen men. Legends grow around quiet people because silence invites imagination. Elias didn't move. "You'll leave," he said softly, "because you know the difference between a prize and a mistake. Hunting a child and her mother is a mistake." Malcolm bristled. "Out of my way." Elias shifted his stance. No, the word didn't echo, didn't boom, it landed like a weight. Malcolm lunged, reaching for his gun, but Elias was faster. Not with showy violence, but with the controlled precision of a man who had learned to act only when it mattered. He knocked Malcolm's arm aside, twisting the gun away and sending it skittering across the ice. Malcolm staggered, stunned by the quiet force behind the movement. Roy stepped forward, but stopped when Elias's gaze met his. There was nothing threatening in Elias's eyes, only unwavering certainty. Roy swallowed hard, then backed away. Malcolm cursed, clutching his wrist. "This ain't over." "It is," Elias replied. "If you walk away now," Royce tugged Malcolm's coat. "Let's go. Ain't worth freezing over." They retreated into the trees, muttering threats Elias didn't bother acknowledging. When they were finally swallowed by distance, Elias let out a slow breath. The silence that followed felt sacred, like the woods themselves had exhaled in relief. He returned to Annie, helping her rise. She leaned into him, strength nearly gone. He gathered her into his arms without hesitation and carried her. Through the snow, as if she weighed nothing more than the memory of sorrow, he was finally ready to release. By the time they reached his ranch, the sky was turning a soft lavender winter's version of dawn. June stood at the window, her small face pressed to the glass the moment she saw movement. When Elias stepped inside, Annie barely upright beside him, June ran to her mother with a cry that broke open the room. Annie knelt, gathering her daughter into her arms, tears warming her frostbitten cheeks. Elias turned away, giving them a moment. He didn't want to intrude on something so tender, but as he walked toward the stove, he felt Annie's hand brush his arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice raw but steady. "You saved us." He shook his head lightly. "A man does what he can." Annie's gaze held him for a long, quiet moment, soft, searching, filled with something that made the cold feel less sharp. There were no declarations, no dramatic confessions. Only the warmth of two people who had both survived winters they hadn't meant to face alone. In the days that followed, Silverbrush talked, as Silverbrush always did. First with suspicion, then curiosity, then reluctant respect. Gossip shifted like wind, but truth settled deep. Elias didn't chase the praise, nor did he push away the unexpected warmth that now waited for him at the dinner table each evening. June's chatter, Annie's gentle, grateful smiles. One night, long after June had fallen asleep, Elias stood outside beneath a sky thick with stars. Annie joined him, her shawl wrapped tight, her breath rising into the quiet air. She didn't speak at first. She simply slipped her hand into his. He didn't look at her yet, afraid the moment might scatter like snowflakes if he moved too quickly. Instead, he let the silence between them thicken into something warm. "You were my only light out there," Annie murmured. "A lantern in a winter I thought would swallow me." Elias exhaled softly. "Maybe we lit each other." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he allowed himself to rest against her warmth. Small gestures, quiet promises. Something like a future unfolding with the patience of dawn-melting snow. The story could end there, soft and complete. But life rarely closes its pages so neatly. Somewhere beyond the ranch, beyond the pines and the thawing grief, the world still waited, full of shadows, possibilities, and paths that led toward days neither of them had yet imagined. Their winter was ending. Something new was beginning. And though the trail ahead would carry its own trials, Elias knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not walk it alone.